Welcome to my channel, a list that brings your story about the love of a mafia boss. Now let's listen.
The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Grandview Hotel's ballroom as I balanced another tray of wine glasses, my feet already screaming in the borrowed heels that were half a size too small. The Chicago elite glittered around me like jewels against black velvet, their laughter echoing off the gilded walls as they celebrated another charity gala that cost more per plate than I made in a month. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to focus on the weight of the tray in my hands, rather than the exhaustion that had settled into my bones like lead. This was my third job today: morning shift at the diner on Michigan Avenue, afternoon cleaning apartments downtown, and now serving wine to people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared entirely. The designer gowns and $1,000 watches blurred together as I navigated between tables, invisible in my simple black uniform. Table 12 needs refills. Marcus, the floor manager, hissed as he swept past me, his eyes already scanning for the next crisis. His perfectly pressed tuxedo made him look like he belonged among the guests, unlike the rest of us staff who moved like shadows around the edges of their world. And smile, for God's sake! These people can smell desperation. I adjusted my grip on the silver tray, the weight making my shoulders ache. The wine was from some French vineyard I couldn't pronounce, each bottle worth more than my rent. My reflection caught in the polished surface of a nearby mirror. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Brown hair pulled back in a severe bun that was already coming loose. I looked exactly like what I was, a 22-year-old woman working herself to death to keep her head above water. The familiar knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach as I thought about the stack of medical bills waiting on my kitchen table. Mom's treatments weren't getting any cheaper, and the insurance company had denied her latest claim with the cold efficiency of a machine. Every dollar I earned went toward keeping her alive, toward buying us another month, another week, another day. I approached table 12 with practiced grace, my smile automatic and hollow. The elderly couple barely glanced at me as I refilled their glasses, their conversation continuing as if I were furniture. The woman's diamond necklace caught the light, throwing rainbows across the white tablecloth. One piece of her jewelry could cover Mom's medical bills for a year. "Excuse me, miss." The man's voice was gravelly, impatient. "This wine is room temperature. We specifically requested chilled." My heart sank. The bottle had been chilled when I picked it up from the bar, but the ballroom was warm, packed with bodies and heated by the massive chandeliers. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll get you a fresh bottle immediately." He waved me away dismissively, already turning back to his wife. I clutched the tray tighter, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation in my chest. This was my life. Apologizing for things beyond my control, smiling while people treated me like I was less than human, pretending their casual cruelty didn't cut deep. The bar was across the ballroom, past the dance floor where couples swayed to a string quartet that probably cost more than my annual salary. I moved carefully, weaving between chairs and avoiding the trailing hems of evening gowns. The borrowed heels made each step precarious, and I could feel a blister forming on my left heel. "Watch where you're going," a woman in emerald silk snapped as I stepped around her chair. Her companion laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. They didn't see me as a person, just an obstacle in their perfect evening. I was almost to the bar when I saw him. He stood near the far wall, partially hidden in an alcove between two marble columns. Even from across the room, he commanded attention in a way that had nothing to do with the expensive cut of his midnight blue suit, or the way the fabric molded to his broad shoulders. It was something in his posture, the way he held himself with absolute stillness, while his dark eyes tracked movement across the ballroom like a predator assessing prey. Thomas Valentino. I didn't know his name then, but I knew instinctively that he was dangerous. It was written in the careful distance other guests maintained from his space, in the way conversations grew quieter when people noticed him watching. He was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of sharp, classical features that belonged on Roman statues. His black hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place despite the warmth of the ballroom. 2 men flanked him, their suits expensive, but their eyes cold and alert. They scanned the crowd with the methodical attention of bodyguards, hands resting casually at their sides in a way that suggested easy access to concealed weapons. Everything about the tableau screamed power and barely contained violence. I forced myself to look away, focusing on my destination. Men like that existed in a different universe from mine, one where money and influence could solve any problem or eliminate any threat. I had no business even noticing him, let alone staring. The bartender was mixing cocktails for another server when I reached the bar, his movements efficient and practiced. The scent of expensive liquor mixed with the heavy perfume of the guests, creating a cloying atmosphere that made my head spin. I waited patiently, shifting my weight from foot to foot as the blister on my heel grew more painful. "What do you need?" The bartender's voice was clipped, professional. He'd been working this circuit longer than I had, and his tuxedo was perfectly pressed, his bow tie straight. He belonged here in a way I never would. "Fresh bottle of the Bordeaux for table 12, I said, setting my tray on the bar. They said theirs was too warm. He rolled his eyes but reached for a new bottle from the ice bucket. Picky bastards. This stuff costs $800 a bottle, and they're complaining about temperature. $800. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was more than I made in 2 weeks, and these people were drinking it like water. I thought about Mom in her hospital bed, about the treatment she needed, about the bills that kept mounting no matter how many jobs I worked. The bartender handed me the bottle, condensation already beating on the dark glass. "Tell them this one's been chilled for 2 hours. Maybe that'll shut them up." I arranged the bottle and fresh glasses on my tray, the weight familiar and comforting. This was what I knew how to do: serve, smile, disappear. I could get through this evening the same way I got through every day, one step at a time, one task at a time. The route back to table 12 took me past the alcove where the dangerous man still stood. I kept my eyes down, focused on not spilling anything, but I could feel his gaze like a physical weight. It was probably my imagination. Men like him didn't notice the help, but something about his presence made my skin prickle with awareness. I was 3 steps past his alcove when disaster struck. A woman in a flowing red gown stepped backward from her conversation, directly into my path. I tried to dodge, tried to shift the tray, but the borrowed heels betrayed me. My ankle turned, my balance went, and the world tilted sideways. Time slowed to a crawl. I watched the bottle of $800 wine arc through the air, its contents catching the light like liquid rubies. The crystal glasses followed, spinning end over end in a deadly ballet. I had a split second to see where they were heading, to register the figure directly in their path. The dangerous man in the midnight blue suit. The wine hit him first, a crimson explosion across his chest that soaked through the fabric and dripped onto his Italian leather shoes. The bottle shattered against the marble floor, sending glass skittering across the ballroom like deadly confetti. The sound seemed to echo forever, cutting through the string quartet and conversation like a blade. Silence fell over our section of the ballroom like a heavy curtain. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward us, could hear the whispered gasps and sharp intakes of breath. My knees hit the marble hard enough to bring tears to my eyes, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the terror that flooded my system. I'd just doused one of the most dangerous-looking men in Chicago with wine that cost more than my monthly salary. He stood perfectly still, dark wine dripping from his ruined jacket onto the floor. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, but his eyes, Christ, his eyes were like looking into the heart of a winter storm, dark gray, almost black, and completely without warmth. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "I'm so sorry." The 2 men flanking him stepped forward, their movements smooth and predatory. I could see the bulge of weapons beneath their jackets, could read violence in the set of their shoulders. This was it. This was how I died. On my knees in a ballroom, surrounded by people who wouldn't lift a finger to help me. But then the dangerous man raised one hand, a small gesture that stopped his bodyguards in their tracks. He looked down at me with those winter storm eyes, and I waited for the explosion, for the anger, for whatever terrible thing men like him did to people who crossed them. Instead, he did something that shattered my understanding of the world. He smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not the predatory grin of a man about to destroy someone. It was small, almost amused, and it transformed his face completely. The harsh lines softened, and for a moment, he looked younger, more human. "I believe," he said, his voice low and rich with just the faintest trace of an accent, "that I was standing in the wrong place." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. Around us, the crowd began to whisper again, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. He extended one hand toward me, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice that made no sense at all. I shook my head mutely, too shocked to speak. His hand was still extended, waiting. After a moment that felt like an eternity, I placed my fingers in his palm and let him help me to my feet. His grip was warm and steady, strong enough to support my weight as I struggled to find my balance on the treacherous heels. "Marcus!" The floor manager's voice cut through the whispers like a whip. He appeared at my side, his face pale with panic. "Sir, I am so sorry. She's new, clumsy. We'll cover the cleaning costs for your suit, of course, and the wine. That won't be necessary." The man's voice carried an authority that made Marcus step back instinctively. "Accidents happen." I looked up at him, studying his face for any sign of the anger that had to be there. No one was this calm about an $800 bottle of wine and a ruined suit that probably cost more than my car. But his expression remained steady, almost gentle. "What's your name?" he asked me directly, ignoring Marcus entirely. "Tessa," I managed to say, my voice hoarse with shock. "Tessa Morgan." He nodded as if filing the information away. "Tessa, are you sure you're not hurt? That was quite a fall." The concern in his voice was so unexpected that tears pricked at my eyes. When was the last time anyone had asked if I was hurt? When had someone looked at me like I mattered? "I'm fine," I said, though my knees were throbbing, and I could feel the blister on my heel bleeding inside my shoe. "Your suit can be replaced." He glanced down at the wine-stained fabric with complete indifference. "Though I admit, I've never worn Bordeaux before. It's an interesting look." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it, short and slightly hysterical. He was joking. This man who looked like he could have people killed with a phone call was making jokes about my clumsiness. "Sir," Marcus interrupted, his voice tight with anxiety. "Perhaps we should discuss compensation." "The only thing I require," the man said, his tone shifting subtly but unmistakably toward something colder, "is for you to ensure that Miss Morgan isn't penalized for this accident. It would be unfortunate if she faced any consequences for something that was clearly not her fault." The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was a threat nonetheless. Marcus went even paler, nodding rapidly. "Of course, sir. Absolutely. No penalties." I stared between them, trying to understand what had just happened. This stranger had not only forgiven my catastrophic mistake, but was protecting me from losing my job. It made no sense. "Thank you," I said, looking up at him. "I don't understand why you're being so kind, but thank you." Something flickered in his dark eyes, there and gone too quickly to interpret. "Everyone deserves kindness, Tessa." The way he said my name made something flutter in my chest, low and warm and dangerous. This was a man who could destroy lives with a word, who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. I should be terrified of him, should be grateful for his mercy, and eager to disappear back into the shadows where I belonged. Instead, I found myself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the light, the surprising gentleness in his voice when he spoke to me. It was a dangerous fascination, one that could only lead to heartbreak or worse. "I should let you get back to your evening," I said, taking a step backward. "Again, I'm so sorry about your suit." "Tessa." He said my name again, and I stopped moving. "What other jobs do you work?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm sorry?" "This is evening work. You have the look of someone who doesn't sleep much. What else do you do?" I shouldn't answer. I should make some polite excuse and disappear before this strange interlude cost me more than I could afford. But something about his attention, the way he looked at me like I was worth listening to, made me honest. Morning shift at Murphy's Diner on Michigan Avenue. Cleaning services in the afternoon. This on weekends and special events. He nodded slowly, processing the information. "That's a lot of work for someone your age." "Medical bills," I said simply. "My mother is sick." The admission hung between us, more intimate than I'd intended. I'd just told this stranger the most important thing about my life, the driving force behind every choice I made. His expression shifted, something almost like recognition flickering in his eyes. "I see." He reached into his jacket, and for a split second, my heart stopped. But instead of a weapon, he withdrew a small white card. "If you ever need anything, a different job, assistance with those bills, call this number." I took the card with trembling fingers. It was thick, expensive cardstock with only a phone number embossed in black. No name, no business, nothing to indicate who he was or what he did. "I don't even know your name," I said, looking up at him. That small, transformative smile appeared again. "Thomas. Just Thomas. Nothing more." But the way he said it, the weight of it, told me it was all I needed to know. "I should go," I said, though every instinct was screaming at me to stay, to bask in this impossible kindness for just a little longer. "Of course. But Tessa..." He waited until I met his eyes. "Keep that card somewhere safe." I nodded, clutching the cardstock like a lifeline. Marcus was already approaching with a cleanup crew, and the crowd around us was beginning to disperse, the drama over. In a moment, this would all feel like a dream. "Thank you," I said one last time. Thomas inclined his head slightly, a gesture that felt oddly formal. "Take care of yourself, Tessa Morgan." I turned away before I could do something stupid like ask him to dance or tell him he had beautiful eyes. As I walked back toward the bar to collect a new tray, I could feel his gaze following me, warm and heavy as a touch. I tucked his card into the deepest pocket of my uniform, where it rested against my hip like a secret. I didn't know who Thomas was or why he'd shown me such unexpected kindness. But something had changed in that moment when our eyes met. Something that made the rest of the evening feel surreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. It would be hours before I learned the truth about the man whose suit I'd ruined. Days before I understood that Thomas wasn't just dangerous. He was one of the most feared men in Chicago. Weeks before I realized that spilling wine on him hadn't been a disaster at all. It had been fate. The card burned against my hip for 3 days after the gala, a constant reminder of the impossible encounter that my rational mind kept trying to dismiss as a stress-induced hallucination. Thomas. Just Thomas. No last name. No explanation. Couldn't be real. Men who looked like fallen angels and commanded rooms with their presence didn't waste time being kind to clumsy waitresses who destroyed their $1,000 suits. but the card was real enough, thick and expensive between my fingers when I pulled it out each night before bed. The number was embossed so deeply I could feel the ridges with my fingertip, tracing each digit like it might reveal some hidden meaning. I'd memorized it without meaning to. The sequence had embedded itself in my mind like a song I couldn't stop humming. Murphy's Diner on Thursday morning was the same grease-scented chaos it had been for the past 8 months. The coffee maker wheezed and gurgled, the griddle spat bacon fat, and the regulars hunched over their newspapers like they were reading state secrets. I moved through the familiar routine on autopilot. Coffee for the construction workers in booth 3, eggs over easy for Mrs. Petrov at the counter, endless refills for the businessman who never looked up from his phone. "You're distracted today," observed Rita, the other morning waitress, as she passed me carrying a pot of coffee that had probably been brewing since the Clinton administration. Rita was 65, had worked at Murphy's for 20 years, and could read people like they were large print books. "Something happened at that fancy party you worked?" I shook my head, focusing on balancing 3 plates on my arm. "Just tired." But Rita's observation was accurate. I kept catching myself staring out the window, watching the stream of pedestrians hurrying past. Part of me, the part that had felt the electric thrill of Thomas's attention, kept expecting to see a familiar figure in an expensive suit materialize among the rush-hour crowd. It was ridiculous. Men like him didn't frequent diners where the coffee cost $1, and the ambiance was provided by a broken jukebox that only played country music from the 1980s. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up automatically to see 2 men in dark suits entering. They looked out of place among the construction workers and retirees, their clothes too expensive, their movements too controlled. One was older, maybe 45, with silver threading through his black hair and eyes that missed nothing. The other was younger, built like a linebacker, with a scar running along his jaw that spoke of violence survived. They chose a corner booth with clear sight lines to the door and windows. When I approached with menus and water glasses, they studied me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Coffee," the older one said. His voice was gravelly, accent faintly Italian. "Black, and information." My hand trembled slightly as I set down the water glasses. "Information?" "About Tessa Morgan." The way he said my name made ice form in my veins. "Young woman, early 20s, works 3 jobs, lives at 2847 Fullerton Avenue, apartment 3B, has a mother in St. Mary's Hospital, cancer ward." The world tilted sideways. They knew where I lived. They knew about Mom. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing, mind racing through a dozen terrible possibilities. Had I been followed? Had someone seen me talking to Thomas and decided I was a threat? "I don't know what you want," I whispered. The younger man smiled, and it was the kind of expression that belonged on sharks. "Relax, sweetheart. We're not here to hurt you. We're here to protect you." "From what?" "From yourself," the older man said. "From making stupid decisions. From forgetting your place." He reached into his jacket, and my heart stopped entirely. But instead of a weapon, he withdrew a photograph. It was taken from across the street, through the diner's window, and it showed me clearly. Wiping down tables, serving coffee, looking tired and ordinary and completely unaware I was being watched. "Nice little life you have here," he continued, setting the photo on the table between us. "Simple, safe. It would be a shame if something disrupted it." I stared at the image of myself, nausea rising in my throat. "How long have you been watching me?" "Long enough." He leaned back in the booth, completely at ease. "Long enough to know that you spoke with someone at the Grandview Hotel last Saturday. Someone you shouldn't have spoken to. Thomas." They were talking about Thomas. The kindness he'd shown me. The card in my pocket. Somehow it had marked me as a target. I thought about his winter storm eyes, the way he'd helped me to my feet with such gentleness, and felt something precious crumble inside my chest. "It was an accident," I said. "I spilled wine on him. We barely spoke." "And yet he gave you something." The older man's eyes glittered with malicious knowledge. "A card, perhaps? A way to contact him?" I forced my expression to remain blank, but something in my face must have given me away, because he smiled. "Smart girl. You didn't throw it away. Question is, are you smart enough to know what it means?" "It doesn't mean anything," I insisted. He was being polite. The younger man laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Thomas Valentino doesn't do polite, sweetheart. He does business. And if he gave you a way to reach him, it's because he sees you as potential business." Thomas Valentino. Finally, a last name to go with the face that had haunted my dreams for 3 nights, the name rolled around in my mind, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench with dread. I'd heard it before, whispered in news reports about organized crime, mentioned in conversations that died when outsiders walked into rooms. "You know who he is now," the older man observed, watching my face. "Good. That saves us some time. Thomas Valentino is the head of the most powerful crime family in Chicago. He owns judges, politicians, half the police force. He's responsible for more deaths than you can count, and he's never been charged with so much as a parking ticket, because witnesses have a habit of disappearing." Each word hit me like a physical blow. The gentle man who'd helped me to my feet, who'd joked about wearing wine, who'd asked about my mother with genuine concern. He was a killer, a monster in an expensive suit who'd fooled me completely with a few kind words and a smile. "So here's what's going to happen," the older man continued. "You're going to forget you ever met him. You're going to throw away whatever he gave you. You're going to go back to your simple little life and pretend Saturday night never happened." "And if I don't?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Then your mother's medical insurance gets canceled. Your apartment lease gets terminated. Your jobs disappear. And you find out just how creative we can get when people don't listen to friendly advice." The threat hung in the air between us, crystal clear in its implications. I thought about Mom in her hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy but still fighting. She was alive because of insurance that barely covered half her bills. Without it, she'd die, and we both knew it. "Who are you?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Friends of the family," the older man said. "People who understand the natural order of things. Thomas Valentino is a dangerous man to know, girl, but he's an even more dangerous man to refuse." The younger man leaned forward, his scarred face serious. "You think he was being kind to you? You think that conversation meant something? You're a pretty girl, Tessa, but you're not special. You're just another toy that caught his attention for 5 minutes." The words stung more than they should have. I'd known, on some level, that a man like Thomas would never seriously notice someone like me. But hearing it stated so bluntly, hearing the pity in the younger man's voice, made something wither inside my chest. "The card," the older man said, extending his hand. "Give it to us now," and this conversation never happened. I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around the thick cardstock. For 3 days it had felt like possibility, like proof that kindness still existed in the world. Now it felt like evidence of my own stupidity. But as I started to pull it out, something made me hesitate. Thomas's voice echoed in my memory. "Keep that card somewhere safe." Not as a casual suggestion, but as an instruction, as if he'd known this moment would come. "I threw it away," I lied, my hand moving away from my pocket. "The night of the gala. I didn't want it." The older man's eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you." "I don't care what you believe," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I'm a waitress. I serve coffee and clean tables and go home to a one-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a leaky faucet. Why would I keep a card from someone like him? They studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet their gaze without flinching. Everything depended on selling this lie, on making them believe I was too ordinary, too smart, too afraid to hold on to something so dangerous. Finally, the older man nodded. Smart girl, smarter than most. He stood, dropping a 20 on the table. Remember what we talked about, and remember that we're watching, always watching. They left without another word, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully as they disappeared into the crowd outside. I stood frozen beside their table, staring at the photograph they'd left behind. My own face, captured without my knowledge, proof that my privacy was an illusion. Rita appeared at my elbow, coffee pot in hand. Friends of yours? No, I said, my voice hollow. Not friends. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of paranoia. Every customer who looked at me too long, every car that lingered outside the window, every shadow that moved wrong, it all felt like surveillance. They were watching, always watching. The phrase echoed in my head like a mantra of doom. During my break, I locked myself in the bathroom and pulled out Thomas's card. In the harsh fluorescent light, it looked innocuous, just a phone number on expensive paper. But it represented something far more dangerous than I'd understood. It was a doorway into a world where people disappeared for asking the wrong questions, where kindness could be a manipulation, where a simple conversation could mark you for death. I should destroy it. I should tear it into pieces and flush it down the toilet, then spend the rest of my life pretending I'd never met Thomas Valentino. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing, the only thing that made sense. Instead, I carefully tucked it back into my pocket, because despite everything, the threats, the surveillance, the knowledge of who Thomas really was, I couldn't forget the gentleness in his voice when he'd asked if I was hurt. Couldn't dismiss the way he'd protected me from Marcus's anger, or the genuine concern in his eyes when I'd mentioned my mother's medical bills. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was stupid. Maybe I was signing my own death warrant. But something deep in my gut told me that the man who'd helped me to my feet wasn't the monster they'd described. Or maybe he was both, angel and demon wrapped in the same beautiful, dangerous package. The afternoon cleaning job passed in a blur of mindless routine. I scrubbed bathroom tiles and vacuumed carpets, and tried not to think about gray eyes and gentle smiles and the weight of secrets in my pocket. But even as I went through the motions of normalcy, I could feel the walls of my small, safe world crumbling around me. By evening, I'd made my decision. I waited until I was home, until I'd checked on Mom at the hospital and assured myself that her insurance was still active, that her treatment was still on schedule. Then I sat on my couch, in my ordinary apartment with its thin walls and leaky faucet, and stared at the card that had changed everything. The number seemed to glow in the lamplight, each digit a gateway to the unknown. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed, my finger hesitating over each button. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was probably going to get me killed. But as the phone began to ring, I thought about the way Thomas had said my name, like it was something precious. I thought about the promise implicit in his final words. Take care of yourself, Tessa Morgan. Maybe he'd meant it. Maybe, in a world full of people who saw me as invisible, disposable, forgettable, maybe he'd actually seen me. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, someone answered. Tessa. The voice was unmistakably his, low and warm and utterly unsurprised. As if he'd been waiting for my call. As if he'd known somehow that I would be brave enough or stupid enough to reach out across the impossible distance between our worlds. Thomas, I whispered, and with that single word, sealed my fate. You used the card. Thomas's voice carried a note of satisfaction that made my pulse skip. I wasn't certain you would. I gripped the phone tighter, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt in my own apartment. The curtains were drawn, but I found myself glancing toward the windows anyway, imagining eyes watching from the darkness outside. I had visitors today, I said without preamble. 2 men in expensive suits who knew everything about me. They said they were friends of yours. Silence stretched across the line, heavy with implications. When Thomas spoke again, his voice had changed, gone cold and dangerous in a way that made me understand, finally, who I was really talking to. Describe them. Older man, maybe 45, Italian accent. Younger one with a scar on his jaw. I closed my eyes, recalling details I wished I could forget. They had a photograph of me. They knew where I lived, where I worked, about my mother's condition. Marco and Vincent, Thomas said, and there was murder in his voice. They work for someone who has forgotten the boundaries of acceptable behavior. The casual way he spoke about violence, as if it were a business decision, a problem to be solved with the same efficiency he might apply to a bad investment, sent ice through my veins. This was who he really was beneath the gentle smiles and kind words. This was the man the newspapers whispered about in coded language. They told me to forget about you, I continued, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. To throw away your card and pretend we never met. And yet you're calling me. Something that might have been amusement crept into his tone. Why? The question hung between us, loaded with significance I wasn't sure I understood. Why had I called? Because I was tired of being invisible, tired of being threatened, tired of living in a world where kindness was so rare it felt like a miracle? Because his eyes had seen me as something more than just another faceless servant? Because I don't like being told what to do, I said finally. And because I want to understand what's happening to me. Then we should meet. The words were calm, matter of fact. Somewhere public, somewhere safe, where we can talk without interruption. Every rational thought screamed at me to say no, to hang up the phone, destroy the card, and disappear into the anonymity that had protected me for 22 years. But the memory of his gentleness, the way he'd protected me from consequences I couldn't even see coming, made me hesitate. There's a coffee shop on Clark Street, I heard myself saying. Brewster's. It's always crowded. Lots of witnesses. Witnesses to what, Tessa? His voice was soft, almost amused. Do you think I'm going to hurt you? The question was more complicated than he knew. Would he hurt me physically? Probably not. Would he destroy me in ways I couldn't even imagine? That seemed increasingly likely. I think you're a very dangerous man, I said honestly. And I think I'm in way over my head. You are, he agreed, and the admission sent a shiver down my spine. But not in the way you think. 1 hour, Tessa. Brewster's on Clark Street. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just made the best or worst decision of my life. Brewster's was exactly as crowded as I'd hoped, filled with the usual Thursday evening mix of students, professionals, and people with nowhere else to go. I chose a table near the back wall where I could see both entrances, ordered a coffee I couldn't afford, and tried to blend into the crowd while my heart hammered against my ribs. He arrived exactly 1 hour after our call ended, slipping through the front door like he belonged there. In jeans and a dark sweater instead of his formal suit, he looked younger, more approachable, but no less dangerous. The other customers gave him space without seeming to realize they were doing it, some primitive instinct warning them away from a predator in their midst. Thomas spotted me immediately, his gray eyes locking onto mine across the crowded cafe. He moved toward my table with that same fluid grace I remembered from the hotel, ignoring the subtle way conversations quieted in his wake. Tessa. He slid into the seat across from me, and I caught his scent again, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse stutter. "You look tired." "I haven't been sleeping well," I admitted. "Funny how death threats affect your rest schedule." A shadow crossed his face. "They threatened you directly?" "My mother's insurance, my jobs, my apartment." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, seeking warmth. "They made it clear that forgetting about you wasn't a suggestion." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something beyond my shoulder. When he looked at me again, there was something almost like regret in his expression. "I should have anticipated this," he said quietly. "Should have realized that showing you kindness would be interpreted as weakness by certain people." "Kindness?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Is that what this is? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've been dragged into some kind of territorial dispute between criminals." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is that what you think I am? A criminal? Aren't you?" The question hung between us, stark and unavoidable. Around us, the cafe buzzed with ordinary conversations. Students complaining about midterms, couples planning weekend trips, office workers decompressing from their day. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that death sat at table 12, disguised as a man with beautiful eyes and gentle hands. "It's complicated," Thomas said finally. "Complicated how?" I leaned forward, studying his face. "Because the men who visited me today painted a pretty clear picture. Murder, extortion, corruption. Are they lying?" "No." The admission was quiet, honest, devastating. "They're not lying." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Some part of me had been hoping he'd deny it, would reveal some elaborate misunderstanding that explained away the darkness surrounding him. Instead, he sat across from me with perfect calm and admitted to being exactly what I'd feared. "Then why am I here?" I asked. "Why did you give me that card? Why are we having this conversation?" Thomas was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. "My father came to this country with nothing," he began. "He built something from that nothing. Protection for our family, our community. Power that couldn't be taken away by people who saw us as less than human. I thought about my own father, who died when I was 15, leaving behind debt and broken promises. And now you run his empire." "I inherited his responsibilities," Thomas corrected, "along with his enemies, his obligations, his sins." He met my eyes directly. "But I also inherited his understanding that some things are sacred: family, loyalty, the protection of innocence. And I'm innocent?" Something flickered in his expression. Heat, hunger, something that made my breath catch. "You're many things, Tessa. Innocent is one of them." The way he said it, like a caress wrapped in shadows, made heat unfurl low in my belly. This was dangerous territory, this awareness crackling between us despite everything I knew about who he was and what he was capable of. "The men who threatened you," Thomas continued, his voice hardening. "They work for Viktor Kozlov. He runs drugs through the port, thinks that gives him the right to challenge decisions that aren't his to make." "Decisions about what?" "About you." His eyes held mine, steady and implacable. "Victor believes that my interest in you represents a weakness he can exploit. He's wrong." The possessive note in his voice sent conflicting signals through my nervous system, terror and thrill warring for dominance. "Your interest in me? Did you think our meeting was coincidence?" Thomas asked softly. "That I just happened to be standing where you could drench me in wine?" My world tilted sideways for the second time that day. "You planned it?" "I've been watching you for weeks, Tessa, learning your routines, your habits, your struggles. He leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed despite the bombshell he'd just dropped. The spilled wine was genuine accident, a gift, really. It gave me an excuse to approach you without seeming predatory. But you are predatory, I whispered, everything clicking into place with sickening clarity. You're a stalker. You've been following me, watching me. Protecting you, he interrupted, and there was steel in his voice now. Do you think your mother's insurance payments have been processing so smoothly by accident? That your landlord stopped hassling you about late rent because he developed a conscience? That you keep getting the better shifts at all 3 of your jobs through sheer luck? The room spun around me as I processed his words. Every small miracle of the past few months, every stroke of good fortune that had kept me afloat, it had all been him. Moving pieces on a board I hadn't even known I was playing on. Why? The word came out broken, bewildered. Why would you do that for a stranger? Thomas reached across the table, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was electric, sending shockwaves through my nervous system despite everything I knew about him. Because the first time I saw you, he said quietly, you were crying outside St. Mary's Hospital after visiting your mother. You sat on that bench for 20 minutes, letting yourself fall apart where no one could see. Then you pulled yourself together, threw away your tissues, and went to work your evening shift with a smile. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 3 months ago, after Mom's doctor had delivered particularly bad news about her prognosis, I'd needed those 20 minutes to grieve before I could function again. You were watching me then? I was supposed to be meeting with someone in the medical building next door, Thomas said. Instead, I found myself fascinated by a young woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders and still managed to be kind to everyone around her. So, you decided to what? Collect me? Add me to your empire like another business acquisition? Pain flashed across his features, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. I decided to make sure you never had to choose between your mother's life and your own survival. The words hit me with devastating accuracy. He'd seen my greatest fear, my most impossible choice, and quietly eliminated it. For months, I'd been living with the knowledge that I couldn't afford Mom's treatment indefinitely, that eventually I would have to watch her die because I couldn't earn money fast enough to keep her alive. And in return? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. In return, you exist, Thomas said simply. You continue being exactly who you are, kind, strong, beautiful in your determination to save someone you love. The world is better with you in it, Tessa. I wanted to make sure you stayed. The confession hung between us, too honest and too intimate for the crowded cafe around us. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the gentle protector with the dangerous criminal, the man who'd orchestrated months of secret kindness with the one who casually spoke of murder and territorial disputes. Victor doesn't see it that way, I said finally. Thomas's expression went cold. Victor sees a vulnerability to exploit. He believes that threatening you will force me to make concessions in our ongoing negotiations. And will it? The smile that curved his lips was sharp enough to cut glass. Victor is about to learn the difference between protecting something precious and being weak enough to lose it. The promise of violence in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a dark thrill through my chest that I didn't want to examine too closely. This was what protection looked like in his world. Not laws or police or institutions that had failed me my entire life, but the absolute certainty that anyone who threatened me would pay for it with blood. What happens now? I asked. Now you decide, Thomas said, his eyes never leaving mine. You can walk away from this table, throw away my card, and pretend this conversation never happened. Victor's people will leave you alone once they realize I've moved on to other interests. And if I don't walk away? Something dangerous and hungry flared in his eyes. Then you accept what's been true since the moment I first saw you crying on that hospital bench. You're mine, Tessa. Mine to protect, mine to care for, mine to keep safe from a world that would destroy you without a second thought. The claim should have outraged me, should have sent me running from the cafe and straight to the nearest police station. Instead, it settled into my bones like something I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. You can't just decide I belong to you, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I already have. Thomas's hand covered mine completely, warm and possessive. The only question is whether you're brave enough to accept it. I looked down at our joined hands, his scarred and strong, mine small and trembling with more than fear. In his world, I would be protected, cherished, removed from the constant struggle that had defined my existence for as long as I could remember. I would never have to worry about Mom's medical bills or my own survival again. But I would also belong to a man who killed people, who operated outside every law and moral boundary I'd been raised to respect. I would be complicit in violence, corruption, the destruction of anyone who threatened his interests. I need time to think, I said finally. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. You have until midnight tomorrow. After that, Victor's patience will run out, and I'll be forced to handle the situation in ways that leave you no choice at all. He stood, pulling out his wallet and leaving enough money on the table to cover both our drinks and a generous tip. As he prepared to leave, he leaned down until his mouth was close to my ear. Think carefully, Tessa, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. But remember, I've been protecting you for months without asking for anything in return. All I'm asking now is that you let me do it openly. He was gone before I could respond, disappearing into the crowd outside as suddenly as he'd appeared. I sat alone at the table, staring at the money he'd left behind, and tried to convince myself that walking away was still an option. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I already knew what my answer would be. The world I'd known was already gone, destroyed the moment I'd looked up into storm-gray eyes and seen my reflection transformed into something precious. The only question now was whether I was brave enough to step fully into the darkness he offered, or foolish enough to believe I could find my way back to the light. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by my bedroom window, staring out at the empty street below and turning Thomas's ultimatum over in my mind like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. Midnight tomorrow. Less than 24 hours to decide whether to surrender my life to a man who'd been manipulating it from the shadows for months, or face whatever consequences came with refusing him. The smart choice was obvious. Walk away. Disappear. Find a new city. A new name. A new life far from Chicago. And the dangerous men who saw me as either a tool or a target. It would mean leaving Mom, abandoning her to a medical system that would let her die the moment her insurance money ran out. But at least I would be free. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took me to imagine her face when I told her I was leaving. Mom, who'd sacrificed everything to raise me alone after Dad died, who'd worked double shifts to keep food on the table and still found time to help me with homework. I couldn't abandon her. Wouldn't abandon her, no matter what it cost me. Which meant Thomas had been right about one thing. I'd never really had a choice at all. Dawn brought no clarity, only the familiar routine of another day spent serving people who saw me as invisible. The morning shift at Murphy's passed in a haze of coffee refills and breakfast orders. But I found myself jumping at every shadow, studying every customer who looked at me for too long. Were they watching for Thomas? For Victor? For some other player in this deadly game I'd stumbled into? Rita noticed my distraction during the lunch rush. You look like hell, she observed, sliding past me with a tray of sandwiches. And you keep checking the door like you're expecting trouble. Just tired, I lied, forcing a smile. But as the afternoon wore on, exhaustion gave way to a strange sense of inevitability. The choice Thomas had offered wasn't really a choice at all. It was an acknowledgement of what had already happened. I'd been his from the moment he'd started protecting me, moving through my life like a guardian angel with blood on his hands. The only difference now was that he wanted me to accept it consciously instead of living in ignorant bliss. I was cleaning apartment 4B in a downtown high-rise when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your mother's room, now." Terror flooded my system, sharp and immediate. I abandoned my cleaning supplies and ran for the elevator, my hands shaking as I jabbed the button for the lobby. The ride down lasted forever, each second stretching like an eternity while horrible scenarios played out in my mind. Victor's people had gotten to her. They'd hurt her to force my compliance. I was too late, too slow, too stupid to protect the one person who mattered most. The cab ride to St. Mary's Hospital cost money I couldn't afford, but I threw bills at the driver without counting and sprinted through the sliding doors into the sterile brightness of the main lobby. The elevator to the cancer ward felt like a torture device, carrying me toward whatever fresh hell waited in Mom's room. But when I burst through her door, heart hammering and prepared for the worst, I found her sitting up in bed, looking better than she had in weeks. Her color was good, her eyes bright, and she was actually smiling. "Tessa." She reached for me as I approached her bed, her grip stronger than it had been in months. "You just missed the most wonderful news." I sank into the visitor's chair, relief making me dizzy. "What news?" "Dr. Martinez was just here. The new treatment protocol they've been considering. The experimental one we couldn't afford. It's been approved, completely covered, no out-of-pocket expenses." Tears shone in her eyes. "They're starting it next week." The experimental treatment. I'd researched it online, found articles about its success rates, its ability to target cancer cells with precision that traditional chemotherapy couldn't match. It was also prohibitively expensive, the kind of cutting-edge medicine reserved for people with unlimited resources or exceptional insurance coverage. "How?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Some kind of special program for qualified patients," Mom said, her voice full of wonder. "Dr. Martinez said my case met all the criteria, and there was an anonymous benefactor who wanted to ensure I received the best possible care." Anonymous benefactor. Of course. I thought about Thomas's words from the night before. "I've been protecting you for months without asking for anything in return." This was his demonstration of power, his proof that he could give me everything I'd ever wanted with a simple phone call. "Isn't it amazing?" Mom continued. "After all these months of worry, of thinking we were fighting a losing battle, suddenly there's hope again." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Amazing wasn't the word I would have chosen. Terrifying was more accurate. Because this gift came with strings attached, invisible chains that bound me to a man who dealt in violence and death. Thomas had saved my mother's life, and now he owned mine in return. "There's something else," Mom said, her voice growing softer. "Dr. Martinez mentioned that the benefactor specifically requested regular updates on my progress. Said they had a personal interest in ensuring my recovery." Personal interest. As if my mother's life was just another business investment, another asset to be managed and protected. The casual way Thomas wielded his power, reshaping lives with phone calls, eliminating problems with strategic applications of money and influence, should have disgusted me. Instead, it filled me with a dark fascination that I didn't want to examine too closely. "You should rest," I said, standing to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow. Tessa." Mom caught my hand before I could step away. "I don't know who's helping us, but they're giving me a chance to see you graduate college, maybe even get married someday. Promise me you'll find a way to thank them properly." I squeezed her fingers gently. "I promise." But as I left the hospital, I knew the thanks Thomas wanted had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with surrender. The evening shift at the hotel was supposed to be my last opportunity to think, to weigh my options one final time before midnight arrived. Instead, it became a lesson in the reach of Thomas's influence and the futility of imagining I could escape it. The event was a corporate dinner for some pharmaceutical company, the kind of sterile affair where everyone wore identical smiles and spoke in corporate buzzwords. I moved through the ballroom with mechanical efficiency, serving wine and clearing plates while my mind churned through the impossible mathematics of my situation. It was during the dessert course that I saw him. Viktor Kozlov stood near the bar, a glass of champagne in his hand, and murder in his pale blue eyes. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of aristocratic features that belonged on old Russian novels. His suit was perfectly tailored, his blonde hair swept back with European precision, but there was something cold and reptilian in his expression that made my blood freeze. He wasn't alone. The two men who'd visited me at Murphy's diner flanked him like guard dogs, their attention fixed on me with predatory intensity. Other guests gave their group space without seeming to realize they were doing it, some primitive instinct warning them away from the violence that radiated from Victor's presence. Our eyes met across the ballroom, and he smiled. It was the kind of expression that belonged on sharks circling wounded prey, full of anticipated pleasure at the destruction to come. He raised his champagne flute in a mock toast, his message crystal clear. Time was running out. I forced myself to look away, to continue my duties as if my hands weren't shaking and my heart wasn't trying to beat its way out of my chest. But I could feel Victor's gaze following my every movement, cataloging my weaknesses, planning how best to exploit them. When my shift manager approached during the cocktail hour, his face was pale with barely controlled panic. "Tessa, there's been a change in assignments. You're being moved to VIP service for the rest of the evening." VIP service meant the private dining rooms upstairs, away from the crowd and witnesses. My stomach clenched with dread. "Why?" "Special request from one of the guests," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Very specific request, non-negotiable." I wanted to refuse, to claim illness or injury, anything to avoid being isolated with Victor and his men. But the fear in my manager's voice told me that wasn't an option. Someone had made it clear that my cooperation wasn't optional. The private dining room on the 7th floor was smaller than the main ballroom, but no less elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Victor was already there when I arrived, seated at the head of a table set for one. His bodyguards had positioned themselves by the door and windows, blocking any possible escape route. "Tessa Morgan," Victor said, his accent adding a cultured menace to my name. "Finally, we meet properly." I set my tray on the sideboard with hands that trembled despite my efforts to remain calm. "What do you want?" "Straight to business. I appreciate that." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." "I'm working." "Not anymore." His smile widened, showing perfect white teeth. "Your manager has been informed that you're indisposed for the remainder of the evening. Sit down, Miss Morgan." The command in his voice left no room for argument. I perched on the edge of the chair, every muscle tensed for flight even though I knew it was useless. Victor's men had sealed the room as effectively as prison bars. "You've been a very busy girl," Victor continued, pouring himself wine from the bottle on the table. "Midnight conversations with dangerous men, secret meetings in coffee shops, such dramatic behavior for a simple waitress." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." He sipped his wine slowly, savoring both the vintage and my discomfort. "Thomas Valentino is a persuasive man, I'm told. Handsome, charming, generous to those who catch his interest. It's easy to see how a young woman might be, confused by his attention. The way he said confused made my skin crawl. Mr. Valentino helped me when I had an accident, that's all." "An accident?" Victor's laugh was like broken glass. "Yes, I heard about your clumsiness with the wine. Quite the coincidence that you happened to spill it on one of the most powerful men in Chicago." It was an accident, I repeated, but my voice lacked conviction even to my own ears. Perhaps. But the conversation that followed certainly wasn't accidental. Nor was the card he gave you, or the phone call you made to him last night. Victor leaned forward, his pale eyes boring into mine. Did you really think such things could remain secret in this city? The casual revelation that he'd been monitoring my communications sent ice through my veins. How long had he been watching? How much did he know about Thomas's protection, about the benefits I'd been receiving without understanding their source? What do you want from me? I asked again. Your cooperation in resolving a business dispute, Victor said simply. Thomas has something that belongs to me, territory that he acquired through questionable means. I want it back. I don't know anything about territory or business disputes. But you do know about leverage. His smile turned predatory. Thomas Valentino is a man who values very few things in this world. His reputation, his power, his control, and now it seems you. The possessive note in his voice when he said you made my stomach turn. I'm not his anything. Aren't you? Victor pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photographs. Your mother's insurance mysteriously approved for experimental treatment. Your landlord suddenly stopped demanding late fees. Better shifts at all 3 of your jobs. Either you're the luckiest woman in Chicago, or Thomas Valentino has been very busy playing guardian angel. Each revelation hit me like a physical blow. Victor knew everything. Every kindness Thomas had shown me, every protection he'd put in place, every way my life had been quietly improved by invisible hands. The scope of the surveillance was breathtaking and terrifying. So you see, Victor continued, you're already his. The only question is whether you're willing to admit it, or whether you'll continue this charade of innocence until it becomes inconvenient for everyone involved. And if I admit it, what then? Victor's expression grew serious, almost gentle. Then you help me send Thomas a message. You tell him that his interests in the Port District are no longer welcome, that certain territories need to be returned to their rightful owners. In exchange, your mother continues receiving her excellent medical care, and you continue living your quiet little life. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Then your mother's insurance gets canceled due to a clerical error. Your jobs disappear due to budget cuts. Your apartment lease gets terminated due to code violations. His voice grew softer, more dangerous. And you discover just how fragile the safety Thomas thinks he's provided really is. The threats were delivered with such casual politeness that they took a moment to register fully. When they did, terror flooded my system so completely that I could barely breathe. Everything Thomas had given me, every protection, every kindness, every hope for my mother's survival, could be stripped away with a few phone calls. You're asking me to betray him, I whispered. I'm asking you to choose, Victor corrected, between a man who's been manipulating your life from the shadows and your mother's life, between his criminal empire and your own safety, between fantasy and reality. He stood, smoothing down his jacket with elegant precision. You have until midnight to deliver Thomas my message. After that, the choice will be made for you. One of his bodyguards moved to escort me toward the door, but Victor raised a hand to stop him. One more thing, Miss Morgan. Thomas Valentino is a very dangerous man to care about. Those who get too close to him have a disturbing tendency to end up dead. Your predecessor, a lovely girl named Elena, learned that lesson too late. The casual mention of another woman, another victim, sent fresh terror through my already overloaded system. What happened to her? Car accident, Victor said with theatrical sadness. So tragic when these things happen to young women who think they can navigate our world safely. The threat was crystal clear. Cooperate or become another tragic accident. Another casualty in a war I didn't understand between men who saw human lives as chess pieces to be moved and sacrificed at will. "Think carefully about your choice, Tessa," Victor said, as his bodyguard finally escorted me to the door. "And remember, Thomas's protection only works as long as he has something to protect you with. Power can be taken away, territory can be lost, but death is permanent." The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending into hell. My legs barely carried me through the hotel's marble corridors and out into the Chicago night, where the cold air hit my face like a slap of reality. I stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by the normal sounds of traffic and pedestrians, and tried to process what had just happened. Victor wasn't just threatening me, he was offering me a choice between two different kinds of destruction: betray Thomas and possibly survive, or remain loyal and watch everything I cared about burn. My phone buzzed with a text message. The number was Thomas's, but the message was simple. "Are you safe?" Somehow he knew. Somehow he'd discovered that Victor had made contact, that the deadline he'd given me was no longer theoretical, but immediate and deadly. I stared at the screen, knowing that my response would set events in motion that couldn't be stopped. "For now," I typed back. His reply came immediately. "Where are you?" I looked around, getting my bearings. "Outside the Grandview Hotel." "Stay there, I'm coming." The finality in those 3 words made something inside me settle with grim certainty. There would be no more delays, no more time to think or weigh options. The choice Victor had demanded and Thomas had offered was about to be made, whether I was ready or not. As I waited on the sidewalk, watching expensive cars navigate the evening traffic, I thought about my mother's face when she'd told me about the experimental treatment, the hope in her eyes, the possibility of a future I'd stopped daring to imagine. Thomas had given me that with a phone call, had made the impossible possible without asking for anything in return. But he was asking now, not just for gratitude or acknowledgement, but for everything. My life, my loyalty, my complicity in whatever darkness defined his world. He wanted me to choose him over safety, over normalcy, over every value I'd been raised to cherish. The black SUV that pulled up to the curb was so quiet I almost missed it. The rear window rolled down, revealing Thomas's face in the dim interior light. His expression was harder than I'd ever seen it, all traces of gentleness replaced by something cold and implacable. "Get in," he said, and his voice carried the absolute authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. I opened the door and slid into the leather seat beside him, immediately surrounded by his presence. The scent of his cologne, the heat radiating from his body, the dangerous energy that seemed to crackle in the air around him. "Tell me what happened," he said, as the SUV pulled smoothly into traffic. So I did. Every word Victor had spoken, every threat he'd made, every casual revelation about the scope of his surveillance. Thomas listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "He knows about Elena," I finished, watching his face for a reaction. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Pain, rage, regret, before his expression shuttered completely. Elena was a mistake, a moment of weakness that cost an innocent woman her life. What happened to her? She got too close to something she should have stayed away from, Thomas said quietly. Me. The admission hung between us, heavy with implication. This was my future if I chose him. Not safety, but the constant threat of violence from his enemies. Not protection, but the knowledge that loving him could be a death sentence. Victor wants an answer by midnight, I said. Thomas checked his watch. That gives us 2 hours. To do what? He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Not just desire or possession, but something deeper and more dangerous. Something that looked almost like love. To end this, he said simply. Victor made one crucial error in his calculations. "What's that?" Thomas's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. He assumed I would let him live long enough to see midnight. The casual way he spoke about murder should have horrified me. Instead, it sent a dark thrill through my chest that I didn't want to examine. This was what protection looked like in his world. Not laws or negotiations, but the absolute certainty that anyone who threatened what belonged to him would pay the ultimate price. "What about my choice?" I asked. "The decision you said I had to make?" Thomas turned to face me fully, his gray eyes intense in the dim light of the SUV. "You made it the moment you got in this car, Tessa. Everything else is just details." He was right, and we both knew it. I'd crossed a line by accepting his protection, by allowing him to fight my battles, by choosing his dangerous certainty over the false safety of neutrality. There was no going back now. No pretending I could return to my old life of invisibility and struggle. "What happens next?" I asked. "Next, you go home and wait," Thomas said. "Victor's threats die with him, and you never have to worry about choosing between your mother's life and your own safety again." "And after that?" His hand covered mine, warm and possessive and absolutely certain. "After that, you're mine. Completely, permanently, without reservation or escape." His thumb traced across my knuckles, a gentle caress that belied the steel in his voice. "No more hiding, no more pretending, no more living in the shadows of your own life." The promise and threat in his words should have terrified me. Instead, they filled me with a sense of inevitability that was almost relief. I'd been fighting to keep my head above water for so long that surrendering to the undertow felt like peace. "Okay," I whispered, and with that single word, sealed my fate. Thomas smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it reached his eyes completely. "Welcome to my world, Tessa Morgan." As the SUV carried us through the Chicago night, toward whatever violence awaited, I thought about the girl who'd spilled wine on a stranger's suit just a week ago. She seemed like someone from another lifetime, innocent and naive and blissfully unaware of the darkness that waited in expensive clothes and gentle smiles. That girl was gone now, replaced by someone who could sit calmly beside a man planning murder and feel nothing but gratitude for his protection. Someone who could choose love over safety, possession over freedom, beautiful danger over empty security. I was Thomas Valentino's now, completely and irrevocably. And as his hand tightened over mine in the darkness of the car, I discovered that surrender felt exactly like coming home. Thomas's penthouse occupied the top floor of a gleaming tower that pierced the Chicago skyline like a steel and glass arrow. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city spread out below, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness like earthbound stars. It was beautiful, elegant, and utterly intimidating. Exactly what I'd expected from a man who wielded power like other people wielded tools. "Wait here," Thomas said, guiding me to a leather sofa that probably cost more than my annual salary. The living space was all clean lines and muted colors, expensive art on the walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I have calls to make." He disappeared into what I assumed was his office, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the weight of what I'd agreed to. Through the windows, Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions, and I couldn't help but think about how small my old life looked from this height. The diner, my apartment, even the hospital where Mom was sleeping peacefully, thanks to Thomas's intervention. They were all just specks in the vast tapestry of the city. I was still staring out at the lights when raised voices drifted from Thomas's office. He was speaking Italian, his tone sharp with authority and barely controlled rage. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. He was coordinating Victor's destruction with the same efficiency he might use to plan a business meeting. The casual way he orchestrated violence should have repulsed me. Instead, I found myself thinking about Victor's cold smile, his threats against my mother, The way he'd spoken about Elena like she was just another casualty in his games. Some people deserved whatever Thomas had planned for them. Tessa. His voice made me turn from the windows. He stood in the doorway of his office, tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking like a different person than the polished businessman I'd met at the hotel. This was Thomas Valentino without the mask, dangerous and magnetic, and utterly focused on me. "Is it done?" I asked. "It will be within the hour." He moved toward me with that fluid grace I remembered from our first meeting, but there was something different in his expression now. Hunger, possession, the look of a man who'd claimed something precious and intended to keep it. Victor made the mistake of threatening you directly. That kind of disrespect requires a very public response. Public response. I thought about what that meant in his world, not a lawsuit or a formal complaint, but blood spilled in ways that would send a message to anyone else considering similar disrespect. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it sent a dark thrill through my system that I was learning not to question. "What about his men? Marco and Vincent? They'll be given a choice," Thomas said, stopping directly in front of me. "Serve new management or join their former boss." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing along my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You don't need to worry about any of them anymore, Tessa. You're under my protection now." Protection. The word had taken on new meaning over the past week, evolved from something I'd never needed to something I couldn't imagine living without. Thomas's protection wasn't just physical safety. It was freedom from the constant struggle that had defined my existence, liberation from the crushing weight of impossible choices. "My mother's treatment," I began, but he silenced me with a shake of his head. "Already arranged. Dr. Martinez will have access to any treatment she needs, any specialist who might help, any experimental therapy that shows promise." His other hand settled on my waist, warm and possessive. "She'll receive the best care money can buy for as long as she needs it." The casual way he reshaped my reality with words still took my breath away. One conversation with Thomas was worth more than years of struggling through insurance bureaucracy and medical bills. He'd given me something I'd never dared hope for, the certainty that Mom would live. "Why?" I asked, studying his face. "Why would you do all this for someone you barely know?" Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability flickering beneath the surface before he controlled it. "I told you. I've been watching you for months, learning who you are." His hands tightened on me almost imperceptibly. "You work yourself to exhaustion to save someone you love. You're kind to people who treat you like furniture. You carry burdens that would break most people and still manage to smile. That doesn't explain the protection, the money, the..." I gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "All of this. Doesn't it?" His thumb traced my lower lip, the touch so gentle it was almost reverent. "When was the last time someone took care of you, Tessa? When did anyone ask what you needed instead of what you could provide?" The question hit deeper than I'd expected, exposing a loneliness I'd learned to ignore. I couldn't remember the last time someone had worried about my welfare, had seen me as something more than a means to an end. Even my relationship with Mom, precious as it was, had become defined by my role as her caretaker. "I don't need taking care of," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Thomas smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. "Everyone needs taking care of, Angel. The difference is whether they're strong enough to accept it." Angel. The endearment sent warmth flooding through my chest, intimate and possessive in a way that made my pulse stutter. This was how he saw me. Not as the exhausted waitress struggling to survive, but as something precious enough to protect, to cherish, to claim. "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Taking care of me?" "Among other things." His hands slid down to my hips, pulling me closer until there was barely an inch between us. I take care of what belongs to me, Tessa. I protect it. I treasure it. I make sure nothing can ever threaten it again. Belongs to him. The possessive language should have triggered every feminist instinct I possessed, should have sent me running for the door. Instead, it awakened something deep and primal in my chest, a longing I'd never acknowledged for someone strong enough to shoulder the burdens I'd carried alone for so long. And in return, I whispered, in return, you're mine. His voice dropped to a low rumble that I felt more than heard. Completely, without reservation, without the possibility of escape. His mouth moved closer to mine, breath warm against my lips. You belong to me now, Tessa. Heart, body, soul, all of it mine to protect and possess. The claim should have terrified me. Instead, it sent liquid heat pooling low in my belly, desire mixing with relief in a combination that was dangerously addictive. This was what I'd been missing my entire life. Not just love, but the absolute certainty that someone would fight for me, would move heaven and earth to keep me safe. Thomas, I breathed, not sure if I was protesting or pleading. Say it, he commanded softly. Say you're mine. I looked up into his gray eyes, seeing myself reflected there, transformed into something precious, something worth protecting. The girl who'd spilled wine on his suit had been invisible, disposable, forgettable. The woman in his arms was treasured, claimed, irreplaceable. I'm yours, I whispered, and the admission felt like coming home. His kiss was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd prepared for. Gentle at first, almost reverent, then deeper as I melted against him. His hands tangled in my hair, holding me exactly where he wanted me while his mouth claimed mine with devastating thoroughness. I could taste possession in his kiss, ownership and protection, and dark promise all wrapped together. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. No more running, he said quietly. No more hiding. No more pretending you can survive in this world without protection. No more, I agreed, though part of me wondered what I was really agreeing to. As if reading my thoughts, Thomas stepped back slightly, his hand still resting on my waist. There are things you need to understand about my world, about what being mine means. Such as the fact that you'll never be completely safe, he said with brutal honesty. My enemies will see you as a weakness to exploit. They'll try to use you against me, to hurt me through you. His grip tightened protectively. I'll do everything in my power to prevent that, but the risk will always exist. I thought about Victor's threats, about Elena's tragic end, about the casual way violence seemed to follow Thomas like a shadow. And you think I can handle that? I think you're stronger than you know. His smile was soft, genuine. I think you've been handling impossible situations your entire life, and this won't be any different. Except now I'll have help. Now you'll have me. The simple statement carried the weight of an oath. My resources, my protection, my devotion, all of it focused on keeping you safe and happy. Devotion. The word sent a flutter through my chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way he looked at me, like I was something miraculous he'd never expected to find. What happens to my old life? I asked. My jobs, my apartment, my independence? You keep what makes you happy. Lose what causes you stress. Thomas moved to a sideboard, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. If you want to keep working, I'll buy you the restaurant of your choice. If you want to go to school, I'll fund whatever education you desire. If you want to travel, see the world, pursue dreams you've never had time for, all of it becomes possible. He handed me one of the glasses, the crystal warm from his touch. The only requirement is that you let me take care of you the way you deserve to be taken care of. I sipped the whiskey, feeling it burn a path down my throat. It was smooth, expensive, nothing like the cheap liquor I occasionally splurged on after particularly brutal days. And if I want to maintain some independence, some sense of my own identity, then we'll find ways to make that work. His expression grew serious. I'm not trying to erase who you are, Tessa. I'm trying to give you the freedom to become who you're meant to be, without the constant fear of survival. The distinction was important, more important than I'd initially realized. He wasn't asking me to disappear into his world like some Victorian wife with no identity beyond her husband's. He was offering to remove the obstacles that had kept me trapped in a cycle of mere survival, to give me the security to discover who I might become if I wasn't constantly fighting to keep my head above water. Show me, I said impulsively. Show you what? Your world. The real one, not just the expensive furniture and city views. I set down my glass, meeting his gaze directly. If I'm going to be part of this, I want to understand what I'm agreeing to. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, respect mixing with something that might have been pride. Most people prefer willful ignorance when it comes to my business. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, his voice soft with something that sounded like admiration. You're not. He led me back to his office, a space that was somehow both elegant and functional. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books and artwork that probably cost more than most people's homes. But it was the technology that caught my attention. Multiple computer monitors, secure phone lines, equipment that looked like it belonged in a war room rather than a businessman's study. This is where I run everything, Thomas said, settling behind his desk. Legitimate businesses, investments, charitable foundations, but also territory disputes, protection agreements, negotiations with people who don't respond to conventional diplomacy. He turned one of the monitors so I could see it, revealing what appeared to be a real-time map of Chicago divided into colored zones. Each color represents a different family, a different sphere of influence. Red is mine. Restaurants, construction companies, shipping, real estate. Green is the Colombians who run most of the drug trade on the south side. Blue belongs to the Irish crew that controls the docks. I studied the map, trying to understand the complex web of power and territory it represented. And Victor? Was yellow, Thomas said, his voice turning cold. Controlled the port district. Thought that gave him leverage over shipping routes. He clicked something, and the yellow sections turned red. Not anymore. The casual way he absorbed Victor's territory, like updating a business spreadsheet, drove home the reality of what Thomas did for a living. This wasn't just about protection or family honor. It was about empire, about controlling vast sections of a major city through carefully orchestrated violence and intimidation. How many people work for you? I asked. Directly? Maybe 200. Indirectly? He shrugged. Several thousand. Restaurant workers, construction crews, shipping clerks, security personnel. Most of them have no idea who ultimately signs their paychecks. And the ones who do know? Are loyal, Thomas said simply, either through choice or necessity. I thought about the bodyguards I'd seen, the way people gave Thomas space without seeming to realize they were doing it, the casual authority he wielded over everyone around him. Are you the most powerful man in Chicago? One of them. His smile was sharp, predatory. Power is relative, contextual. In certain circles, I'm untouchable. In others, I'm just another businessman with good lawyers and flexible morals. Which circle do I live in now? Mine, he said without hesitation. Which means you're untouchable too, Angel. Anyone who threatens you threatens me directly. The possessive certainty in his voice sent heat spiraling through my chest. I was beginning to understand the addictive nature of his protection. Not just the security it provided, but the way it made me feel precious, irreplaceable, worth defending at any cost. A soft chime from his computer drew his attention to one of the monitors. He read something there, his expression growing satisfied in a way that made my stomach clench with dark anticipation. "It's done," he said simply. "Done." Victor was dead, along with whatever threat he'd represented. I should have felt horror, guilt, some recognition of the moral line that had just been crossed on my behalf. Instead, I felt only relief and a disturbing sense of justice. Victor had threatened my mother, had spoken about Elena's death like it was entertainment, had tried to use me as a weapon against Thomas. Whatever had happened to him, he'd earned it. "How do you feel?" Thomas asked, studying my face carefully. "Safe," I admitted, and realized it was true. For the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I felt truly safe. Not just physically, but emotionally, financially, completely protected from the kind of devastating loss that had defined my existence. "Good." He stood, moving around the desk to where I sat. "Because safety is just the beginning of what I want to give you." "What else?" His hands framed my face, thumbs tracing along my cheekbones with exquisite gentleness. "Everything. Pleasure, comfort, luxury, devotion, anything your heart desires." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I want to worship you, Tessa. I want to show you how it feels to be cherished by someone who has the power to give you the world." The promise in his words, the heat in his eyes, sent desire flooding through my system so intensely it was almost overwhelming. This wasn't just about protection or security anymore. It was about passion, about the kind of all-consuming connection I'd never believed possible. "Thomas," I breathed, not sure what I was asking for, but he understood anyway. His mouth found mine again, this kiss deeper, more demanding than the first. His hands tangled in my hair, holding me exactly where he wanted me while he claimed my mouth with devastating thoroughness. I could taste possession in his kiss, ownership and hunger, and dark promise all wrapped together. When he lifted me onto his desk, scattering papers and pushing aside equipment with casual disregard, I should have protested. Should have insisted on taking things slow, on maintaining some semblance of control over the situation. Instead, I wrapped my arms around his neck and pulled him closer, surrendering to the fire he'd ignited in my blood. "Mine," he whispered against my throat, his mouth finding the sensitive spot where my pulse hammered. "Finally, completely mine." "Yours," I agreed, the word torn from somewhere deep in my chest. "Always yours." As his hands began their exploration of my body, as pleasure built between us with devastating intensity, I thought about the girl who'd cried alone on a hospital bench 3 months ago. She'd been invisible, struggling, fighting battles she couldn't win with resources she didn't have. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who belonged to one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. A woman who was protected, cherished, claimed by someone with the power to reshape reality with a phone call. I was Thomas Valentino's now, in every way that mattered. And as he whispered promises against my skin, of protection, devotion, pleasure beyond imagining, I discovered that surrender had never felt so much like victory. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of a mirror in what had once been my apartment, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. The reflection showed someone I barely knew. Hair styled by professionals, makeup applied with expert precision, wearing a dress that cost more than I used to make in 3 months. But it was the expression that shocked me most. Gone was the exhaustion, the constant worry, the drawn look of someone fighting a losing battle against an uncaring world. In its place was something I'd never seen before: contentment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Thomas had been patient, careful, introducing me to his world in measured doses while making sure I never felt overwhelmed or trapped. The penthouse had become home gradually, my few possessions mixing with his expensive furnishings until the space felt like ours rather than his. My jobs had ended with generous severance packages and glowing references that would open doors if I ever chose to work again. My mother's medical care had transitioned seamlessly to a private facility where she received treatment that seemed more like luxury hotel service than hospital care. Every aspect of my old struggle had been quietly eliminated, replaced by security I still couldn't quite believe was real. "You look beautiful." Thomas appeared in the doorway, immaculate in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. Even after 3 weeks of waking up beside him, the sight of him still made my pulse stutter. "Ready?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for what tonight represented. Thomas was taking me to a gathering of Chicago's most powerful families, not just legitimate businessmen, but the people who really controlled the city from the shadows. It would be my first public appearance as his, my formal introduction to a world where violence and elegance danced together in perfect, deadly harmony. "Remember," Thomas said, moving to stand behind me in the mirror. His hands settled on my shoulders, possessive and comforting. "You belong there. You belong with me. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally." The casual way he spoke about defending my honor should have worried me. Instead, it sent that familiar thrill through my system. The dark pleasure of being claimed by someone powerful enough to make the threats reality. "What if they don't accept me?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me for days. "What if they see me as an outsider, someone who doesn't belong in their world?" Thomas's reflection smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Then they'll learn very quickly that my happiness is more important than their opinions." The drive to the venue took us through Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods, past mansions that looked like palaces and estates that sprawled across multiple city blocks. The restaurant itself was understated from the outside, no flashy signs or obvious wealth displays, but I could feel the power radiating from within as we approached the entrance. A valet took the keys to Thomas's Bentley, and I noticed how the young man's hands trembled slightly when he recognized who he was serving. Even here, among people accustomed to wealth and influence, Thomas commanded a special kind of respect, born of fear and admiration in equal measure. The maitre d' led us through a main dining room filled with Chicago's elite, politicians I recognized from television, business leaders whose names graced buildings downtown, socialites whose pictures appeared in gossip magazines. But we didn't stop there. Instead, we were escorted to a private room in the back, where the real power brokers gathered away from prying eyes and recording devices. The conversation tentar novamente continue mas direzione para o final, e faça final definitivo e satisfatório, que cause catarse. Two. The conversation quieted as we entered, 24 pairs of eyes turning to assess the newcomer Thomas had brought into their sacred circle. These were the puppet masters of Chicago, men and women who controlled everything from city contracts to federal investigations, who could make careers disappear with a word or create fortunes with a handshake. Thomas, an elderly man with silver hair and eyes like winter, approached us, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to deference. "We were beginning to think you'd forgotten about our little gathering." "Never, Don Castellano," Thomas replied, and I realized I was meeting the head of the city's oldest crime family. "I wanted you to meet someone very important to me." The old man's gaze shifted to me, appraising and sharp despite his age. "So this is the young woman who's captured your attention so completely." "She's lovely, Thomas, but bringing outsiders to family gatherings is..." He paused delicately. "Unusual." "Tessa isn't an outsider," Thomas said, his voice carrying a quiet steel that made several nearby conversations falter. "She's mine, which makes her family." The declaration rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. I felt the weight of every gaze, the calculations happening behind expensive facades as Chicago's shadow elite processed this information. Some faces showed approval, others skepticism, but all registered the significance of Thomas's public claim. "Family," Don Castellano repeated slowly. "That's quite a statement, my boy." "It's not a statement," Thomas replied. "It's a fact." Before the older man could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. 3 men in federal badges were arguing with the restaurant's security, their voices carrying despite attempts to keep the confrontation quiet. "FBI," someone whispered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas's hand found mine, his grip steady and reassuring, even as I felt panic rising in my throat. This was what I'd feared most about his world. The moment when law enforcement would come crashing through the careful facades and expose the violence beneath the elegant surface. "Mr. Valentino," one of the federal agents called out as he pushed past security. "We need to speak with you." "Agent Morrison," Thomas replied calmly, not releasing my hand. "You're interrupting a private dinner." "We have information about Victor Kozlov's death," Morrison continued, ignoring the shocked silence that followed his words. "New evidence that suggests his murder was ordered by someone in this room." The accusation hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I could feel the tension crackling around us, could sense the careful balance of power shifting as everyone waited to see how Thomas would respond. "Victor Kozlov was a drug dealer and a coward," Thomas said with perfect calm. "His death was unfortunate, but hardly surprising. Men in his line of work rarely die of old age." "Witnesses place you at a meeting with him the night he died," Morrison pressed. "They say you made threats." "I make threats every day, Agent Morrison. It's part of doing business in this city." Thomas's smile was razor sharp. "But I didn't kill Victor Kozlov." The lie rolled off his tongue with such practiced ease that I almost believed it myself. But I knew the truth. Knew that Victor had died because he'd threatened me. That Thomas had orchestrated his murder to protect what belonged to him. "Then you won't mind coming with us for questioning," Morrison said, producing handcuffs. "Actually, I would mind," Thomas replied. "You see, Agent Morrison, you've made a critical error in your investigation." The federal agent paused, uncertainty flickering across his features. "What error?" Thomas pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a video file. "The error of assuming Victor Kozlov is dead." He turned the screen so Morrison could see it, and I watched the agent's face go pale. On the phone was grainy security footage showing Victor Kozlov alive and well, boarding a private jet at a small airfield outside the city. "Turns out Victor was smarter than we gave him credit for," Thomas continued conversationally. "When he realized his position in Chicago had become untenable, he decided to relocate to warmer climates. I believe he's currently enjoying the beaches of Costa Rica, well beyond your jurisdiction." Morrison stared at the footage, his carefully constructed case crumbling before his eyes. "This is impossible. We have a body, dental records." "You have the body of Victor's cousin Dmitri, who bore an unfortunate resemblance to his more famous relative," Thomas said. "Dmitri was killed in a drug deal gone wrong. You'll find the real perpetrators already in custody, along with enough evidence to close that case permanently." The elegant way Thomas had misdirected an entire federal investigation was breathtaking in its complexity. He'd eliminated Victor while providing law enforcement with alternative suspects, false evidence, and a narrative that removed him from suspicion entirely. "As for the threats you mentioned," Thomas continued, "I did indeed meet with Victor that night, to inform him that his business practices were no longer welcome in my territory, and to suggest he find more suitable accommodations elsewhere. As you can see, he took my advice." Morrison's jaw worked silently as he processed this information. Around us, the gathered elite watched with expressions of barely contained amusement. They were witnessing a masterclass in power, Not just the ability to commit violence, but the sophistication to make that violence disappear entirely. "We'll be verifying this information," Morrison said finally, his authority deflated. "Of course you will," Thomas agreed. "You'll find everything in order. You'll also find that questioning me further would be inadvisable. My lawyers get testy when federal agents harass their clients without probable cause." The agents left without another word, their investigation effectively dismantled in under 10 minutes. As the restaurant returned to its normal rhythms, I stared at Thomas with new understanding of exactly how powerful he really was. "You let him live," I said quietly. "Victor. You made him disappear instead of killing him." Thomas's hand tightened on mine. "Did you think I was lying when I said I'd protect you?" Victor posed a threat, so I eliminated that threat. Permanently. The method was less important than the result. But Agent Morrison saw exactly what I wanted him to see, Thomas finished. A criminal who fled rather than face justice, leaving behind false evidence and alternative suspects to satisfy federal quotas. The sophistication of it was staggering. Thomas hadn't just eliminated an enemy. He'd turned Victor's disappearance into a tool that protected everyone in the room, while simultaneously discrediting federal investigation efforts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Don Castellanos' voice cut through the resumed conversations, "I believe we've witnessed something remarkable tonight. Not just the resolution of an unfortunate business dispute, but a demonstration of why Thomas Valentino commands our respect." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. What had started as skepticism about my presence had transformed into admiration for Thomas's handling of the federal investigation. "But more importantly," the old man continued, "we've seen why the woman who stands beside him deserves our respect as well." All eyes turned to me again. But this time the expressions were different. Where before I'd seen calculation and doubt, now I saw acceptance. Not because of who I was, but because of how Thomas had claimed me, how completely he'd integrated me into his world. "Tessa Morgan," Don Castellanos said formally, "welcome to the family." The word sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with belonging. These people, criminals, power brokers, shadow rulers of a major city, were accepting me as one of their own. Not because I'd earned it, but because Thomas had declared it so. Later that night, as we sat on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city lights, I tried to process everything that had happened. "Victor really is dead, isn't he?" I asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, whiskey glass balanced on his knee. "Victor ceased to be a problem the moment he threatened you," he said finally. "Whether that happened through relocation or more permanent solutions is irrelevant." The non-answer was answer enough. Victor was gone, eliminated so thoroughly that even federal investigators had been convinced he'd simply fled. Thomas had protected me not just from immediate danger, but from ever having to worry about Victor's return. And now? "Now you're officially part of my world," Thomas said, turning to face me. "The families have accepted you. Law enforcement has been neutralized, and your mother's treatment is progressing better than her doctors ever expected." It was true. Mom's latest scans had shown remarkable improvement, the experimental treatment working better than anyone had dared hope. For the first time in years, her doctors were using words like remission and recovery instead of managing symptoms and buying time. "What about my old life?" I asked. "The girl who worked 3 jobs and worried about medical bills?" Thomas set down his glass and pulled me onto his lap, his arms wrapping around me with possessive tenderness. "That girl was surviving," he said softly. "You're living." He was right. The constant fear, the crushing weight of impossible choices, the exhaustion that had been my constant companion. All of it was gone. In its place was security I'd never imagined possible, protection that extended to everyone I cared about, and love that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "I love you," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Thomas's arms tightened around me, his face buried in my hair. Say it again. I love you, Thomas Valentino. I love your dangerous world, your impossible protection, your beautiful violence. I pulled back to look into his gray eyes. I love belonging to you. And I love you, Tessa Morgan, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. More than power, more than empire, more than my own life. As he kissed me under the Chicago stars, I thought about the girl who'd spilled wine on a stranger's suit 4 weeks ago. She'd been invisible, struggling, fighting battles she couldn't win. She'd believed that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that protection was something that happened to other people. That girl was gone now, transformed into a woman who belonged to one of the most dangerous men in America. A woman who was protected, cherished, claimed by someone with the power to reshape reality itself. I was Tessa Valentino now, not officially, not yet, but in every way that mattered. I belonged to this world of beautiful violence and elegant power, belonged to a man who would burn down cities to keep me safe. And as Thomas carried me inside to our bedroom, to our bed, to our life together, I realized that sometimes the best kind of love wasn't the safe kind, or the sensible kind. Sometimes the best kind of love was the kind that claimed you completely, transformed you utterly, and never let you go. In the darkness of our room, with Thomas's hands and mouth worshipping my body like I was something sacred, I whispered the truth that had taken me 4 weeks to understand. I was never really alive until you made me yours. His response was lost in the storm of passion that followed, but I felt it in every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment. Thomas Valentino had saved me, not just from Victor's threats or medical bills or the crushing weight of survival, but from a life half lived in the shadows. Now I existed in the light of his attention, protected by his power, cherished by his love. I was his angel, his treasure, his completely, and I would never, ever let him go.